Well, good morning, and welcome to the Indiana Clean Diesel webinar for the 2014 DieselWise Indiana Grant Program opportunity. My name is Carl Lissick, and a member of the Indiana Clean Diesel Coalition. I'm also the Executive Director of South Shore Clean Cities. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the South Shore Clean Cities website at southshorecleancities.org. The Indiana Clean Diesel Coalition started in 2008 with emission reduction projects across the state of Indiana when the application for the National Clean Diesel Funding Assistance Program was announced. The goal of the Indiana Clean Diesel Coalition is to provide a conduit for opportunities for statewide emission reduction opportunities. DieselWise Indiana and South Shore Clean Cities continue to partner on diesel emission reduction projects in Indiana. DieselWise Indiana provides funding and technical assistance. South Shore Clean Cities acts as a grant writer and project manager for the implementation of many of these awards. DieselWise Indiana and South Shore Clean Cities are working together to broaden the Indiana Clean Diesel Program network and are looking for organizations and opportunities to collaborate with other groups to broaden project scopes and bring a new and innovative programs to the state. If you are interested in becoming involved, contact information will be given at the end of this presentation. So let's get started. I would like to introduce a friend and ally for the state of Indiana, Mr. Sean Seals. Sean is a Senior Environmental Manager at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management for the Office of Air Quality. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sean Seals.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Carl. Wanted to share a little bit of information about this 2014 DieselWise Indiana solicitation via the webinar. For those who were able to join us yesterday but had to experience some of the technical difficulties, we of course apologize for that. Hopefully I won't be too repetitive, but where maybe you missed something, hearing it the second time will help. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on the presentation itself today. So what we're here today to talk about is, as you can see, the 2014 DieselWise Indiana Grant Program, which is a partnership between IDEM's DieselWise initiative and the Indiana Clean Diesel Coalition. So why do we spend so much time talking about clean diesel here in Indiana? Well, diesel engines, as everyone probably knows by now, are the workhorses of the nation. Although many diesel engines already have some form of emission controls on them, the legacy fleet, those older vehicles, continue to be in use and continue to emit large amounts of nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and air toxics. Now, these emissions are linked to a variety of things, including premature deaths, asthma, lost work days, and other health-related impacts every year. So who is eligible to apply for DieselWise Indiana grants? Well, in this instance and in most instances, it's pretty much anybody who has a diesel fleet or a connection to a diesel fleet. For this round, public diesel fleets are certainly eligible to apply, and these include your typical state, county, city, municipal, and school fleets, as well as quasi-governmental fleets. Port-oriented fleets are often considered to be quasi-governmental, for example. Private diesel fleets that serve a public need, and I think those 4 words at the end are an important caveat for this solicitation. I'll go into the details of why that is a little bit later, but these private fleets that serve a public need could include single vehicle owner-operators, large on-road fleets, could be the mining industry, marine, really could be anything as long as this private diesel fleet serves a public need. And then the new and more exciting and most exciting part of this particular solicitation is, for the first time ever, DieselWise Indiana is actually going to provide funding for the infrastructure costs related to alternative fuel dispensing. So public-private partnerships that are focused on alternative fuels are now eligible applicants as well for this solicitation. Examples of these include a private alternative fuel infrastructure company along with a public need-serving fleet partner. Now, what that really means for all practical purposes is a public entity that focuses on the development and the installation of the infrastructure is eligible to apply, but must apply in partnership with a fleet of vehicles, whether that's a school system perchance, a municipality, whatever that might be, that serves a public need. And what EPA has defined in this instance as serving a public need is really tied to the funding source itself. These funds are made available through a consent decree, more specifically a supplemental environmental project in relation to a permit violation in Northwest Indiana. And these funds, because the permit violator, for lack of a better term, is an entity that serves a public need, EPA has dictated that these funds should also go towards entities that serve a public need. That, in essence, means what the vehicles or what the fleet does or addresses is a necessary activity for public service. If you think of public service in this case, we're really talking about things like school buses that transport kids back and forth to schools, refuse haulers that pick up garbage and trash each and every day. There are some gray areas where maybe we can talk about other delivery organizations that maybe serve as an alternative to a traditional delivery service like the United States Postal Service. So public need is kind of open for interpretation, and we will use some flexibility to define what that ultimately does mean. What types of projects will EPA or will the DieselWise Indiana program fund? Well, in this instance, and as it has always been, U.S. EPA and or CARB verified technologies are really the minimum spec, if you will, for most all of the project types that we're going to talk about today. In the case of retrofit technologies, these are EPA or CARB verified exhaust projects that typically include things such as diesel oxidation catalysts, particulate filters, closed crankcase ventilation, pretty much the things we've been doing for years and years that are emission reduction strategies that are in the exhaust stream itself. We will also fund US EPA or CARB verified idle reduction technologies. These can be auxiliary power units, fuel operated heaters, air conditioning systems, a variety of different types of technologies to lower the necessary use of the larger diesel engines. DieselWise Indiana will fund verified aerodynamic types of projects as well as low rolling resistance tires. These are the trailer skirts that you see on the trailers of most of the trucks that are traveling over the roads today, as well as gap reducers, single wide wheels and tires, what we used to call the wide bias tires. EPA certified engine repowers. This is basically when you're taking an older diesel engine out of a piece of equipment and replacing it with a newer, cleaner version, whether that's diesel-powered or alternative fueled. With EPA certified vehicle and equipment replacements, in this case we're really focused on certified, not verified. And what we're talking about here are taking old vehicles or old pieces of equipment out of service and replacing them with newer pieces of equipment that may be a lot cleaner and may be a lot more efficient. And we'll talk a little bit about what types of replacement projects will score better a little bit later. And then the new and exciting component of this particular solicitation is the public-private alternative fuel infrastructure fleet partnership. And this, a good example of what this may be is a compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas dispensing facility, someone who's in the business of manufacturing that infrastructure, to get together and partner with a public need serving fleet partner. Let's say there's a local community, a city or a county across northern Indiana that has an interest in transitioning to alternative fuel, but they don't have the funding for the infrastructure itself. With those two getting together, the infrastructure costs can be covered, and as long as there is a demonstrated need with that public need serving fleet partner. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Now, what vehicle engines and other types of things are eligible to apply, or what can be our project basis? Well, it really is just about anything if you look at this. Buses, medium, heavy-duty trucks, marines, locomotives, non-road engines, and that last option that we talked about that's a little bit new, and that's alternative fuel infrastructure. Here's where we get to the bigger point, and that is, let's talk about the funding itself. How much of different projects will be funded? Well, first and foremost, this is one of the largest, if not the largest, DieselWise Indiana solicitations that we've had for years and years. We're sitting on roughly $2.5 million that is now available for clean diesel projects across northern Indiana. And any maximum single grant award cannot exceed $750,000. Now, to give you some perspective on that, typically our solicitations really only make available about $500,000 to $800,000. And our maximum grant award is usually somewhere in the range of $200,000. So we've definitely increased the cap, if you will, on these projects. Verified retrofit technologies are, of course, something that we're going to fund as always. These are those exhaust streams, if you will, that we talked about earlier. And because of when they are EPA or CARB verified technologies, they have an instant impact as soon as that vehicle is running. So as a result of that, we will cover 100% of the cost of the retrofit technology for exhaust controls in this solicitation. Engine upgrades will cover up to 75% of the cost for engine upgrades. And engine upgrades, in essence, are the OEM upgrade kits that are available for some diesel engines, where you can simply add some technology to the diesel engine, or maybe it's just a matter of reprogramming the engine to an extent to make it cleaner and greener and a little more up to current standards. Once again, DieselWise will cover up to 75% of that cost. Verified idle reduction technologies. These are those alternatives to running the primary diesel engine. We're going to cover up to 75% of any standalone idle reduction technology project. This is up from roughly 25 to 50% of the cost covering that we have had in the past. Idle reduction and exhaust control matches. If an applicant puts together exhaust controls along with idle reduction technology, we're going to cover up to 100% of that. And APUs, I think it's worth noting on the bottom of this, APUs are really only eligible on long-haul Class 8 vehicles with 2006 or older engine configurations. And to be more clear, that simply means that on Class 8 vehicles, only 2007 and newer vehicles would be eligible for APUs, primarily because of some of the California rules that exist. That 2007 and newer engine configuration does not apply to anything beyond Class 8 vehicles. Moving on to verified aerodynamic technologies and low rolling resistance tires. We will once again cover these up to 75% of the cost. There will be some caveats that you'll find within the solicitation. For example, if these tires or aerodynamic technologies already are on the vehicle, these funds can't be used to simply update and buy new tires to replace old tires. This is really designed to be a transition from older technology to newer technology. So we'll cover up to 75% of the cost for aero and tires. And if you pair that with idle reduction, still 75% of the cost. And once again, anytime you throw in a EPA or CARB verified exhaust control technology on any of your projects, DieselWise Indiana will cover up to 100% of the cost for that project. Certified engine repowers. This, as I've mentioned before, is when we're taking a, let's use for example, a county bulldozer that has an older engine that's starting to reach the end of its life, but the mechanicals on this piece of equipment are still in good shape. A repower would be simply pulling that engine out, replacing it with a newer, cleaner alternative, whether that's diesel-powered or alternative fuel-powered, would be entirely up to the applicant. Now, I think one thing worth pointing out on this is not only will we cover up to 75% of the cost, but these repowers must include a complete engine and emission control system to the design specs that it was manufactured, meaning you can't simply replace a older engine with a newer engine and not bring the computers, if you will, up to spec as well. The check at the bottom is a key thing for our repower and replacement projects. The goal is for these to take a older diesel engine off of the street and put a newer one on the street. Therefore, that engine must be scrapped or remanufactured to the next EPA standard to make sure that we are achieving those emission reductions. Vehicle equipment and replacements, pretty similar to what we saw on the repowers. Drayage vehicles up to 50% of the cost. That traditionally only applies to really large manufacturing facilities and to some extent some port facilities. We'll cover up to 50% of the cost on replacing those vehicles. And then all other vehicle replacements will also cover up to 50% of the cost, as long as they are 2010 or newer model year certified engines, which clearly shouldn't be a problem in the calendar year 2014. Once again, same sort of expectation on the replaced vehicle, and that is that the older vehicle must be scrapped or the engine must be remanufactured to that next EPA standard to make sure, once again, that we're getting the emission reductions we intend and hope for through this program. And then our newest and most exciting component for this particular solicitation are our public-private alternative fuel infrastructure and fleet partnerships. We will cover up to 75% of the labor and equipment for eligible public and private CNG or LNG infrastructure projects. Private alternative fuel infrastructure projects will be deemed eligible as long as there is a public need demonstrated fleet that has agreed to come on board, so to speak, and is a part of that application. Public need fleets must demonstrate an existing or future commitment to support adequate fuel volume of the infrastructure. Just a couple more comments on this particular component because this is new to us all. I think the key thing here we want to keep in mind is that we are very excited about the opportunity to fund alternative fuel infrastructures, but what we need to be able to do is to be able to demonstrate that not only is there, what we need to be able to demonstrate is that there is a fleet that is ready, willing, and able to use those fuels so that we don't put money into an infrastructure that isn't fully taken advantage of and doesn't necessarily give us the emission reduction potential we're looking for. Once again, to give you a sense of how the partnership would work, you can get a little bit more information, obviously, or quite a bit more information on the DieselWise Indiana solicitation itself found on the website. However, what we're really looking for here are applications that will come as partner applications of the entity that wants to develop the fuel infrastructure along with that fleet that serves a public need, let us say, for example, a city, county, a municipal fleet of some sort, and that's traditionally what they're going to be, demonstrating that they are a clear and intentional partner in this project. They have or they intend to purchase vehicles moving forward to use this fuel, provide some estimates on how much of this fuel they would expect to be using, just making it very clear when we review these applications that this is a great project and this is a project where the infrastructure is necessary and will be valued. So now we've got a basic sense of what types of things we'll fund, and let's talk a little bit about the application process itself. You can submit proposals to DieselWise Indiana directly via email, or you can also submit those in partnership with South Shore Clean Cities across northern Indiana. It really doesn't matter to me either way. If you want some boots on the ground, so to speak, that can help you maybe a little more short term, I might recommend that you work with South Shore to the extent that you can. simply because they are in your backyard and I am in Indianapolis. Once those applications come in to me, we will review them. I've got a couple other technical staff and myself that will look at them, and we'll give them basically a numerical score, and then we'll rank them. Funding recommendations will then be finalized based on these rankings, as well as some other factors, and those factors provide us the flexibility to look at different types of technologies and make sure that geographically we're covering as much territory as we can, and maybe have some innovative, newer types of things that we will fund that we can set up as pilot projects. Once that is all set up and we recommend an award for an entity or a project, I will send out letters and we will get in touch with each other, and then the next step will be we'll develop a grant agreement between those project partners and the state of Indiana, and that is the grant agreement that basically provides the legal understanding that is between the state and the project partner on who's going to do what and how. And then finally, upon full execution of the grant agreement, the project can move forward. Now, what that really means, I think it's important to keep an eye on or understand, is planning that does not cost anything of the applicant can certainly go on and on and on behind the scenes, but the project partners should not incur any costs that they would seek reimbursements for prior to that full execution date, which in essence is the date that the Attorney General of the state of Indiana signs that grant agreement. At that point, we have the ability to legally reimburse the entity. Prior to that, we don't have that ability. So here are the criteria for the programs or for the application. Total emission reduction potential is always going to be the thing that rises to the top as far as scoring goes. 25 points are available there based on the total emission reduction potential of the project. And I want to clarify that we're talking apples and apples comparisons, not apples and oranges. For example, putting a diesel oxidation catalyst on a school bus versus replacing a marine tugboat engine, we understand the emission reduction potential is dramatically different between those two. We don't compare those types of projects. We compare similar projects whenever we're looking at the points that we award. Level of commitment from the equipment owner and operator. In essence, what this boils down to is what level of financial match the applicant or the project partners are contributing. Our goal is to spread these funds as far as we possibly can, of course, and in so doing, the more that folks leverage funds of their own with our funds, it gives us the greatest chance to really expand these programs across. Proximity to sensitive populations, daycare facilities, schools, nursing homes is good for 15. Term remaining of useful vehicle life. This is a 15-point category also, and to give you some sense, if there's a vehicle that maybe has 2 more years of useful life left in it, compared to a vehicle that has 6 more years of life, obviously that vehicle is going to have 4 more years of emission reductions on the street. That vehicle is going to score better. Reduction in fuel and oil consumption is worth 15, and then a willingness to establish and enforce an idle reduction policy of some sort or another is worth 5 points. And then there are 2 opportunities for bonus points on applications submitted for just about anything here at the state of Indiana. And those are for Indiana-owned and operated business enterprises. They simply need to complete an Indiana Economic Impact Form along with their application. And those that are active in the state of Indiana's Minority and Women Business Enterprise Participation Plan, they will need to make sure that they submit a MBE, WBE document along with their application. So at this point, we can open it up officially for questions, and I will kind of turn it back over to Carl and the gang at South Shore to handle this however they choose to do it.
Sean, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on the decision for the counties, Lake, LaPorte, St. Joe, Elkhart, and Allen County being the one who can receive this money?
Right. What I can say is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the funding source for this project, for this $2.5 million, is actually a combination of two supplemental environmental projects that were contained within consent decrees between US EPA and businesses in northern Indiana. In the consent decree itself, it was specifically stated what areas these emission reductions must take place. So these areas, the Lake, LaPorte, St. Joe, Elkhart, Allen counties, as well as there are cities that are listed in the solicitation, for example, Gary, Hammond, Michigan City, South Bend, Elkhart, and Fort Wayne. That is really dictated by the consent decree, which is ultimately the funding source and the method that we must follow.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Sean? I don't see any further questions at this point, Sean, but as everybody can see, both Sean and Carl's information is listed on the screen. And if you have any other questions in regards to the webinar, it is being recorded, will be sent to everybody. And oh, we had another question come in, Sean. Somebody's still a bit confused on what about public service need. Can you elaborate on that again, please?
Well, sure. I can expand on that a little bit, and I think that this is the most challenging part of this solicitation when it developing the application, as well as when we receive the application, determining whether this project truly serves a public need based on EPA's input. And I think that probably the easiest way to look at it is this a need that the citizens of that area have each and every day that is provided by either directly or indirectly the city, the county, the municipality of whatever sort. The obvious ones, as I said, are school buses transporting the children, refuse haulers picking up the trash, United States Postal Service maybe delivering delivering your mail. Things such as these are clear, but there are also going to be some gray areas, and I'll just use one as an example that we looked at last time around, and we determined that it probably did fall into that category, and that was a community in northern Indiana that had a recycling program, and all of their recycling was handled by a single entity in the area. Is it a public need per se? That's where the gray area was. For those that chose to recycle their products or some of their trash, that was the only option they had. So we determined that yes, that would serve a public need per se. But generally speaking, I think what a person in an application would have to do is demonstrate that it is serving a public need comparable to those obvious needs that I've mentioned already. I know that's a gray area, and I know it's not very, very clear, and there isn't a black and white answer. And in a way, that's a good thing, because that's giving us the flexibility to look at it and determine whether we feel we can argue that, yeah, that does serve a public need. Whereas if it was black and white, we wouldn't be able to make arguments in some of those cases.
Can a private company qualify?
A private company can qualify if, once again, whatever they do does serve some public need. A private company can qualify if they are in the infrastructure development business and are partnering with an alternative fuel fleet in an area. A good example of the first one is there are private companies that provide contractually the recycling or the garbage collection in a lot of municipalities. that would be a private company that we would look at and feel that, yes, they do serve that public need.
And somebody's a little concerned that if you do not work for a government entity, you won't qualify. Is that true, and can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I would say that's not entirely true. I will say that the program, unfortunately, based on the language of the consent decree, is geared a little more towards public service entities. However, as I also mentioned in the example from the last time, there are opportunities for folks that have a somewhat indirect connection to public service to still qualify. But the reality of it is, and it's a sad reality in this instance for these funds, a trucking company, for example, that moves, well, I'm in Northwest Indiana, the first thing obviously that comes to mind would be steel. A trucking company that moves steel from point A to point B to point C would not be eligible for funding through this $2.5 million program. What we will have coming out a little bit later this year is the statewide DERA funded program, which does provide that kind of flexibility that doesn't have those public need requirements. Rest assured that I am not enthusiastic about the consent decree language that requires a limitation on geography or a limitation on public need, but the consent decrees were written that way for a reason, and I am simply having to follow those rules to the extent that I can.
Do projects have to be substantially completed within a certain time frame?
Yes, they do. The solicitation itself is going to give more details on those expiration dates, but I'm paging through it right now just so I can give those dates here. For projects that are infrastructure-related projects, that being the development of all fuel infrastructure, CNG or LNG, those projects have to be completed at or, well, no later than December 31st, 2015. So that would be the end of next year. Projects that are not infrastructure-related would need to be completed by July 31st of 2015. So that's about a year from now.
For infrastructure, is that only for new projects or existing projects as well?
That is a gray area that I have inquired with US EPA, and I believe that the response that I have gotten would indicate the same thing as it would be with a new project, and that is as long as there is a clear demonstration that there is a public need serving fleet that's ready, willing, and able to use that fuel if you transition from one to the next, then it would be something we would see as an eligible project.
Are there any other questions for Sean at this time? Well, I don't see any other questions right now. And again, the contact information for Sean and Carl are on the screen. And this, again, will be sent out to everybody after the webinar. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you.